Mr. Kelly. Mr. Kelly, on at least one occasion, told associate number one that he would be, quote, dead, close quote, if another copy of the first tape surfaced. Mr. Kelly also bragged to associate number one that he had dotted his I's and crossed his T's, quote, unquote, and that the young girl who was depicted in the videos and the young girl's family would not testify against him in connection with the trial because he had relocated them and paid them off. It was subsequently learned that Mr. Kelly, through multiple means, had paid the young victim and her family over $2 million not to testify and come forward in connection with the 2008 trial. So to those R. Kelly fans who want to talk about the 2008 trial and the fact that he was acquitted, it was bogus. R. Kelly bought his acquittal. He bought this victim and their parents and ensured that the truth was never told to that jury in 2008. There were subsequent disputes between Mr. Kelly and associate number one relating to the payment of the monies for the recovery of the first tape. Those were documented contemporaneously, meaning there are contemporaneous documents from that time period, making it impossible for this to have only now been fabricated. On one occasion, Mr. Kelly and Mr. McDavid paid associate number one approximately $160,000 to $170,000 in cash contained inside a shopping bag. This was during the 2008 trial, and it was done to ensure that associate number one did not come forward and describe the obstruction of justice that had been carried out at the request of Mr. Kelly. Ultimately, a copy of that first videotape was provided to Ms. Fox's office by me in February of 2019, earlier this year. There is no question relating to the chain of custody of that videotape, what it represents, whether R. Kelly is on it, whether he paid a significant sum of money together with others in order to attempt to bury it and prevent the truth from coming out. Be clear, R. Kelly and those around him obstructed justice in connection with the 2008 trial. Those are some of the charges that he now faces. And I am highly confident that when all the evidence is heard, that he will be convicted along with others around him of obstructing justice in connection with the 2008 trial. We have now provided 2 videotapes to law enforcement. We are presently trying to locate a 3rd videotape that we know exists. That is the tape with Ms. Van Allen, Mr. Kelly, and the 14-year-old girl. The reports of 20 videotapes being provided to law enforcement are completely bogus, ridiculous, absurd, nonsensical. I don't know what other words I can use. Whoever is reporting that should be ashamed of themselves, because whatever source they're using is ridiculous, bogus, not credible. Ladies and gentlemen, it hasn't happened. 20 videotapes have not been turned over to law enforcement. What else is bogus and ridiculous? This story that recently was reported about the two young ladies, Miss Savage and Miss Clary, being evicted from the Trump Tower. Whoever reported that, you should be ashamed of yourself. You're not a journalist. It's disgraceful. Stop worrying about clicks and do your job. Those young ladies have not been depicted. They may have not been evicted. They may be evicted within 30 days, but they presently have not been evicted. Why do I care about this? Why do I care whether this false information about 20 videotapes, etc., is out there? I'll tell you exactly why I care. This is a serious matter, and I want to ensure that justice is done here. The media has a responsibility to get it right. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to plant bogus stories only so they could be knocked down. What did we see earlier today? We saw the eviction story being knocked down by the two young ladies. They posted a video of them sitting in the Trump Tower. Am I surprised by that? No, because I knew it was false. Before the press reports on facts relating to this, you need to ask questions as to where this information is coming from and whether the individuals have any basis to actually know about it. A major national network contacted me on Saturday or Sunday and asked me if both Miss Savage and Miss Clary were in Atlanta. They had received a report that they were in Atlanta and they were getting ready to run the story. I represent Alice and Angelo Clary. I still represent them. They are in touch with their daughter. She is here in Chicago. She never went to Atlanta. Miss Savage also has not gone to Atlanta. Once again, I don't know where this information is coming from. It's not accurate. As it relates to Alice and Angelo Clary, like I said, they are in contact with their daughter. They are in the process of trying to be reunited with their daughter. They hope to be reunited with their daughter shortly. Obviously, this has been a very long road for both their daughter and them. And you can only imagine the amount of time that it's going to take for that relationship to be repaired. I want to address one more issue before I take questions. The people on social media and others that are talking about the fact that this is somehow driven by racism or bigotry should be ashamed of themselves. Every one of my clients is African American. This doesn't have anything to do with race. This has everything to do with justice and what's right and wrong. Many of the investigators are African American. This is a case about young girls, many of whom came from rough neighborhoods, who were economically disadvantaged and were easily preyed upon by a guy who used his power and wealth and contacts to get away with it for almost 30 years. That's what this case is about. It's not about black and white, it's about right and wrong. So I'll be happy to take some questions. Yep.
Explain again. You said there's three. Turned over 2 or 3 tapes. What are they of? There's one of Mr. Kelly and the young woman, and there's one of a young woman with an older woman. Kind of walk me through the tapes you've turned.
We have turned over 2 tapes. Both tapes depict Mr. Kelly with a girl who is 14 years of age.
Same girl? Same
girl. Clearly depict Mr. Kelly. There's no question that it's him. The mole is clearly visible on his back. They both, the young girl and Mr. Kelly, reference the fact that she's 14 on both of these tapes. There's a 3rd tape that we are trying to locate. That tape, we understand, depicts Mr. Kelly with the same 14-year-old girl together with Miss Lisa Van Allen.
Just to follow up on that, who did you give the tapes to?
We initially provided the tapes to Cook County, and they in turn provided them to federal law enforcement.
And your 3rd tape, is that the 4th tape that the prosecutors in Chicago, federal prosecutors in Chicago mentioned?
No.
They don't have? No.
No.
This is a separate tape?
Correct.
Mr. Avenatti?
And do these tapes have to do with the case, the federal case in Chicago or New York?
Well, the tape, I think the tapes would be used as evidence in all of the cases, both in the state case as well as both federal cases.
What do you make of the allegations in the New York indictments that say that cartel's business operated as a criminal enterprise?
Well, I certainly think that there's substantial evidence of that in light of how long this occurred, where it occurred, the number of states that were involved. This was not some isolated incident. I mean, you are talking about literally dozens of victims.
You mentioned that the Clarys have been in touch with their daughter. What is the progress of those talks, and why do you believe that they will, in fact, meet again?
Well, the progress is incremental. Again, as you can imagine, this is a very emotional time. I think that Ms. Clary and Ms. Savage likely will slowly come to the realization that this is over. And when I say it's over, I'd be very, very surprised if Mr. Kelly ever sees the light of day again outside of federal custody at this point in his life. I do not think he will be granted bail in connection with both of these proceedings, and I believe that ultimately he will serve a lengthy and rightful prison sentence for his decades of abuse. I think it's going to take time for both of them to come to that realization. You know, these two young ladies have been brainwashed for the better part of 2, 3, 4 years in many instances. They've been fed quite a story by Mr. Kelly. And from what I've heard and the evidence that I've seen, this man is a sociopath. In every term, in every way, every sense of the word. The conduct that this man engaged in, had he not been as successful as a songwriter and performer, he would have been locked up for the rest of his life a long time ago.
What's the nature of the talks that Azrael's had with her parents? Are we talking about text messages, actual phone calls that are long?
They've had text messages and telephonic communications. I don't want to get into the details of what they discussed because, again, I don't want to violate their privacy. But this is going to be an incremental and slow process. And I'm hopeful, and they're hopeful, that they're going to be able to rebuild the relationship with their daughter, who they love very much.
And when was the last time they had contact? Today, yesterday?
I believe yesterday.
The federal charges combined with the state charges seem to identify about 10 people. There might be some overlap, 10 victims. Yet you talk about dozens on top of dozens. Are there a lot of unidentified victims? Are the feds still working to track them down? Why do you say there are dozens and dozens? There's
a number of unidentified victims, and there's a number of other identified victims who have not been cooperative thus far with law enforcement and have not been willing to provide interviews or statements to law enforcement. And I believe that the hope is that as time progresses and as people begin to realize that, again, this is over, that they will come forward and do the right thing and also have the courage to disclose what happened to them.